Christmas was supposed to be my favorite time of the year. Every December, our town covered itself in lights. Every store smelled like cinnamon and pine, and for a little while I convinced myself that maybe this Christmas would feel different. Maybe this would finally be the year my family acted like, well, a family. I should have known better. The mall parking lot was packed. My mom laughed as Dad complained about finding a space. Sophie bounced beside us, pointing at decorations hanging from the ceiling. "This place is gorgeous," she said. Dad smiled at her immediately. "It sure is. Come on, let's make this a fun day." I smiled too. For a few minutes, I honestly believed him. The first store we walked into was one of Sophie's favorites. Dad looked at her and grinned. "Go ahead, sweetheart. Pick whatever you want." She hesitated. "Really? Really?" Mom nodded. "It's Christmas." That was all the encouragement Sophie needed. She picked up designer jeans, then a winter coat, 2 pairs of boots, 3 sweaters, a perfume set, wireless headphones, a designer handbag she'd been talking about for months. Every time she looked at Dad and asked, "Is this okay?" he answered the same way. "If you like it, get it." Not once did he ask the price. Not once did Mom tell her to put anything back. I followed behind them carrying shopping bags, telling myself not to think about it. Maybe they'd budgeted for everyone. Maybe they were waiting until it was my turn. At the checkout, the cashier smiled. "Your total today comes to $1,247. Dad didn't even blink. He pulled out his credit card. "No problem." A few seconds later, the receipt printed. Sophie hugged him. "Thank you." "You deserve it," he said. Watching them made something tighten in my chest. I was happy for her. At least I wanted to be. I just wished I didn't feel invisible standing 2 feet away. We wandered into another clothing store afterward. I wasn't looking for anything expensive. Honestly, I almost never was. Near the back, I found a cream-colored sweater. It was soft, simple, nothing flashy. The price tag read $35. I smiled without realizing it. I could already picture wearing it on Christmas morning. I carried it over to Dad. "I found something." He looked at the tag. Then he looked at me. "You have $20. I thought he'd misunderstood. "It's 35. "I know. I can pay the difference." He shook his head. "No." I stared at him. "You have $20. Find something cheaper." His voice wasn't loud. He wasn't angry. If anything, he sounded bored. Like he was stating the weather. Behind him, Sophie was carrying shopping bags worth more than my rent. For a second, I couldn't say anything. Mom looked over but didn't interrupt. Dad had already turned away. I looked down at the sweater one last time. Then I folded it carefully and placed it back on the shelf. "It's okay," I said quietly. "I don't really need it." No one answered. We simply walked to the next store. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. Whenever Sophie found something she liked, everyone gathered around to admire it. When I stayed quiet, nobody seemed to notice. I wasn't angry at Sophie. That part is important. She never demanded special treatment. She simply accepted the life she'd always been given. Looking back now, I think that's what hurt the most. This wasn't an exception. This was normal. I had just finally stopped making excuses for it. On the drive home, Christmas music played through the speakers. Mom asked Sophie which perfume she liked best. Dad joked about needing another closet because of all her shopping bags. No one asked why I hadn't bought anything. Not even once. I stared out the window at the lights passing by. Something inside me felt different. Not broken. Just awake. The next morning, I helped Mom wrap presents. Our dining room looked like Santa's workshop. Boxes everywhere. Ribbon everywhere. Tape stuck to everything. Mom handed me scissors. "Can you wrap Sophie's headphones?" "Sure." I wrapped them carefully. Then the perfume. Then the boots. Then another box. There were so many gifts I lost count. Finally, I asked as casually as I could, "Do you need help wrapping mine too?" Mom paused for half a second. "Oh." She looked toward the hallway. We haven't finished yours yet. Something about the way she answered felt rehearsed. I nodded. No problem. Later that afternoon, Sophie walked into my room. She leaned against the door. You've been quiet. I'm fine. You sure? I smiled. I'm just tired. She frowned. Was yesterday weird? I looked at her. What do you mean? I don't know. She shrugged. Dad seemed different with you. I almost laughed. Different? That implied something had changed. Instead, I asked, did you notice? She looked uncomfortable. A little. I've noticed for years. She didn't answer. After a long silence, she quietly said, I never asked him to do that. I know. She nodded once. Then she walked away. That conversation stayed with me. Because for the first time, I realized Sophie wasn't completely unaware. She saw pieces of it too. She just didn't know what to do with them. A few days before Christmas, Mom asked me to help decorate the upstairs guest room. We kept old holiday decorations in the attic. The attic was dusty, freezing, and full of boxes nobody had touched in years. I climbed the ladder carrying a flashlight. Halfway through sorting ornaments, I noticed several old storage containers shoved against the far wall. One cardboard box had my name written on masking tape. That surprised me. I pulled it closer. Inside were school drawings, elementary school report cards, old Christmas crafts. Nothing unusual, until I noticed another envelope underneath everything. It wasn't addressed to me. It simply said, Family Records. The envelope looked old, yellowed around the edges. I wasn't trying to snoop, honestly. I almost put it back. Then I heard Dad calling from downstairs. Find the lights? Almost. I slid the envelope beneath a stack of wrapping paper without opening it. Something about it made me curious. Why was it hidden under my childhood things, instead of stored with important documents? Before I could think about it longer, Mom climbed halfway up the ladder. Everything okay? Yeah. You've been up here a while. I'm looking. She looked around. Then her eyes landed on the box beside me. For just a split second, her expression changed. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear exactly. It looked more like panic. She recovered almost instantly. Don't worry about those old papers, she said quickly. They're just outdated family records. She reached for the envelope before I could touch it. I'll take these downstairs. She didn't even look inside. She simply tucked the envelope under her arm. Come help me with the tree. I followed her, but something felt off. Mom wasn't usually protective about paperwork. That night I couldn't stop thinking about the envelope. Why had it been hidden? Why had she reacted so quickly? And why had she looked genuinely nervous? Christmas Eve arrived. Our house smelled like cookies and pine needles. Relatives weren't coming this year, so it was just the four of us. Dad watched football. Mom cooked. Sophie wrapped the last few presents. Everything looked normal. Too normal. After dinner, Mom asked me to grab extra candles from the hallway cabinet. I opened the cabinet. No candles. Instead, I noticed a small metal lockbox sitting behind a stack of tablecloths. The lid wasn't completely closed. Someone must have forgotten to latch it. As I moved it aside to reach the candles behind it, a folded sheet of paper slipped onto the floor. It looked familiar. The same yellowed paper. The same handwriting. Before I could pick it up, I heard footsteps behind me. I froze. Mom called from the kitchen. Did you find them? Almost. My hands shook as I picked up the folded paper. Across the top, in faded blue ink, were 4 words that instantly made my stomach tighten. Regarding Emily's adoption records. Emily, my name. I had never heard the word adoption connected to me in my entire life. I barely had time to process what I was looking at, before I heard someone walking toward the hallway. I slipped the paper back exactly where I'd found it, closed the lockbox and stepped away just as Dad rounded the corner. You okay? He asked. Yeah, I said, forcing a smile. I found the candles. But as I carried them back toward the dining room, one thought kept echoing in my head. If that document was talking about me, Then what else had my parents never told me? I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those 4 words again. There had to be another explanation. Maybe it referred to someone else. Maybe it was an old legal form that had nothing to do with me. I told myself that, over and over, until Christmas morning. It didn't help. Our family opened presents after breakfast every year. Dad handed Sophie a small mountain of gifts. She laughed as she unwrapped the headphones I'd wrapped a few days earlier. Then, the designer perfume. Then jewelry. Mom smiled proudly every time Sophie thanked them. Eventually, Dad slid a small envelope toward me. Merry Christmas. Inside was a $20 gift card to a bookstore. I smiled anyway. Thanks. Nobody noticed that I folded the card back into the envelope without looking at it again. The rest of the morning felt strangely distant. I wasn't thinking about presents anymore. I was thinking about that document. 2 days later, Sophie went out with friends. Dad was helping a neighbor fix a fence. Mom drove to the grocery store. I found myself standing in front of the hallway cabinet before I'd consciously decided to walk there. The lockbox was gone. My heart sank. I searched the cabinet anyway. Nothing. Then I remembered the attic. I climbed back upstairs. The box with my childhood things was still there. This time, I searched every folder. Near the bottom was another envelope, tucked inside an old photo album. It wasn't the same document I'd seen downstairs, but it was enough. Inside were copies of papers. Most were too faded to read. One page had my first name. Another had a court seal. Then I saw my birthday. Only, it wasn't. The birth date on the document was 3 months earlier than the one I'd celebrated my entire life. My hands started shaking. I heard the front door downstairs. Someone was home. I slipped the papers back exactly where I'd found them. This time, I wasn't willing to pretend I'd imagined everything. That evening, I waited until Sophie was in her room. Mom was washing dishes. Dad was reading in the living room. I stood in the kitchen. "Can I ask you something?" Mom looked up. "Of course." "Was I adopted?" The plate slipped from her hands. It hit the sink instead of the floor. Dad looked over immediately. Neither of them spoke. That silence answered the question before either of them opened their mouths. Mom slowly sat down. "Where did you hear that?" "I found paperwork." Dad closed his book. "We were going to tell you someday." I couldn't help laughing. It wasn't a happy laugh. "I'm 27. 28. Mom corrected automatically. I stared at her. "That's what you noticed." She covered her face with her hands. "We made mistakes." I felt years of confusion rushing back all at once. The shopping trip. The birthdays. The clothes. The rules. The way Sophie was always enough while I always had to settle. My voice cracked. Was that because I was adopted? Dad stood. "No." "Then explain it." Neither of them answered immediately. Finally, Mom whispered, "Please, sit down." "I'd rather stand." She nodded. "When you were a baby, your biological parents died in a car accident." My chest tightened. There were no close relatives able to care for you. "So you adopted me?" "Yes." "Then why?" Dad answered this time. "Because we wanted another child." I believed him. At least that part sounded true. So, why was everything different? Mom started crying. It wasn't supposed to become different. But it did. Dad looked exhausted. When Sophie was born 3 years later. He stopped. Mom continued. She had serious medical problems. I frowned. What? She spent months in the hospital. I looked toward Sophie's room upstairs. I never knew that. We didn't want either of you growing up carrying that weight. Dad rubbed his forehead. The medical bills nearly destroyed us. Pieces slowly started fitting together. You couldn't afford everything. He nodded. So, Sophie got everything because you felt guilty? Mom shook her head immediately. No. Then what? She took a deep breath. We became afraid. Afraid of what? That after everything she'd survived, she'd feel like life owed her happiness. Dad looked ashamed. We overcompensated. The room fell silent. Mom continued quietly. Every time we said yes to her, it became harder to say no. And every time we told me no, she nodded through tears. It became easier. Nobody spoke. I realized something that somehow hurt even more than the adoption itself. I had never been treated differently, because I wasn't loved. I'd been treated differently, because unhealthy habits had slowly become normal. Nobody had stopped them. Not even me. But the $20 sweater? Dad looked down. I knew that was wrong the second I said it. Then why say it? He swallowed. Because I'd already spent too much. I blinked. You spent over $1,200. I know. You could have bought the sweater. I know. So why didn't you? His voice became barely audible. Because somewhere along the way, I stopped noticing how unfair I was being. That answer didn't magically fix anything. It wasn't enough. Days passed before I spoke much again. Sophie eventually knocked on my bedroom door. Can I come in? I nodded. She sat beside me. They told me. I looked at her. You knew? Her eyes widened. No. I swear. You never heard anything? Never. She looked horrified. I thought we looked alike because everyone always said sisters don't have to look identical. I believed her. She seemed as shaken as I was. After a long silence, she whispered, Can I ask something? Okay. Have you hated me? I answered honestly, No. I've been jealous. I've been hurt. But I never hated you. She started crying. I should have noticed. You were a kid. I wasn't always. She looked toward the shopping bag still sitting in her closet. I remember the sweater. So do I. I should have said something. You shouldn't have had to. She nodded. My parents should have. For the first time since Christmas, we hugged. It didn't erase years of hurt. But it felt real. A week later, Dad asked if we could all sit together. Nobody wanted another difficult conversation, but we did it anyway. He placed an old photo album on the table. Inside were pictures I'd never seen. My biological parents holding me. Hospital records. Letters. One envelope remained unopened. Dad pushed it toward me. We kept this because we thought maybe someday, you'd want it. It was addressed to me. Not by my adoptive parents. By the social worker who had arranged my adoption. Inside was a short handwritten note. It explained that my biological parents had loved me deeply, that my adoption had been carefully chosen after months of searching for the right family, and that they hoped I would grow up, knowing I had always been wanted. I cried harder reading those words than I had reading the adoption papers. Not because I felt abandoned. Because for years I'd quietly wondered if maybe I simply hadn't been enough. The letter reminded me that none of that had ever been true. Later that evening, I finally asked the question I'd been carrying. Did you love me? Mom looked heartbroken. Every single day. Then why didn't it feel that way? She couldn't answer immediately. Dad did. Because love isn't just something you feel. It's something people experience. And we failed to show you equally. No excuses. No blaming circumstances. Just the truth. It was the first thing they'd said that actually began rebuilding my trust. The next weekend, Dad asked if I'd go shopping with him. Just us. I almost refused. Instead, I agreed. We ended up in the same mall. Without saying anything, he walked into the same clothing store. The same rack was still there. Different colors. Same sweater. He picked it up. I owe you something. I smiled sadly. It's not about the sweater. I know. I can't buy back years. No. But maybe I can stop pretending those years didn't happen. He handed me the sweater. I won't tell you there's only $20. I laughed through tears. For the first time in weeks. Things didn't become perfect. Healing never works that way. Some conversations were uncomfortable. Some memories still hurt. Sometimes I still noticed old habits. Sometimes they caught themselves too. The difference was that now they admitted it. They apologized. They tried. Real change is slow. But it is possible. Months later, Sophie called me while she was shopping. I found a sweater. Oh? It's $35. I laughed. You should get it. I already did. There was a pause. I bought two. Why? The second one's yours. When she handed it to me later that evening, I recognized the color immediately. Cream. Soft. Simple. Just like the one I'd quietly put back on the shelf that Christmas. I hugged her before she could say anything. Not because the sweater mattered, because the gesture did. I still think about that Christmas shopping trip sometimes. If Dad had simply bought me that $35 sweater, I probably never would have questioned anything. I might never have found the documents. I might never have learned the truth about where I came from. Most importantly, my family might never have been forced to face the quiet favoritism that had shaped all of us for years. Learning I was adopted didn't explain away the hurt. It didn't erase it. But it gave us a chance to stop pretending nothing was wrong. For me, that became the real gift that Christmas. Not forgiveness, not forgetting, just finally living with the truth.